Welcome to the Find My Catalyst podcast. Sales is another word for problem solving. We all have problems. We know people have problems. We're looking to solve. And we know that there are solutions out there, but we struggle with this. Well, how do we find the solution? Where does the nudge come to help us take the next step and start solving tough problems? The intention of this podcast is to help you find your catalyst and take that next step. Catalyst for me is Dan Pontefract. Dan's been on the podcast a couple of times before. He is a 4-time author, leadership strategist, and 4-time TED speaker. Let's get to the conversation. Dan, it is awesome to have you back on the podcast. How have you been?
Hey, Mike. It's great to be here again. Thank you very much. And to the question, okay. I mean, I just came back the point of this recording from spending 10 days in your glorious country. For those that don't know, I'm Canadian. So I was unleashed. I was able to cross the 49th parallel and hang out in America for 10 days on the West and East Coast. And yeah, so it's nice to get out and about, almost back to normal, although I'm not sure what normal means. So there we are.
What states did you get to?
California, Tennessee, and New York. Yeah, a little bit of everything.
Well, then the New Yorkers out there probably would challenge your accent there, but you did well. Well, I guess welcome back home. You had a Forbes article and you talked about, and I've got to go to the article to get the language right, but horizontal ignition is needed now more than ever. And the thing that jumped out at me when I've seen things like this, and we'll get into the definition of horizontal ignition, but job shadowing, an opportunity to work with others inside the organization, get a sense for the type of work that people do, the things that happen in the day-to-day, not the things that they hear about that happen. But what is horizontal ignition?
Well, in a way, I suppose I get frustrated by what often is happening inside of organizations. There's this proclivity, this propensity to focus on vertical ambition. And that's not to say that I'm against the development of self or job promotion or, quote, moving up on the ladder, because it's important. Like I do believe that, but it's not for everybody either. And so when myopically an organization fixates on vertical ambition, again, whether that's the leader, the HR learning team, the sales team, whatever, I think they're missing out on a huge swath of people who don't necessarily want, or are aiming for the VP chair or the director chair. They just want a good life. They want to contribute. They want to feel valued, but they do want to grow, just not necessarily vertically, Mike. And so horizontal ignition essentially calls out what I don't think is happening in the org. And that is, what can we do better than we are doing today to help develop the cross-functional, if you will, skill sets of people, their networks, their competence, intellect, the way in which they might develop themselves to take on other projects, other roles in other parts of the organization. Sidebar, if people are our most important asset, which is a balderdash phrase in and of itself, why aren't we doing all that we can to develop said people as our assets? So that's kind of where it stems from. It's, I'm a recovering chief learning officer. I've been out of the 10-step system for about 4 years now. And so, but I still will always be a chief learning officer. I would be looking at the organization and saying, what would I be doing differently if I was in the chair? And this is one of those.
This is one of those things that I think is fascinating for a couple of reasons. One, a mistake I made early in my career when I was at UPS, the United Parcel Service, I thought that was the thing. You just kind of move up. You move from one role to another role, and then you move into management, and then you move into some kind of leadership. And then all of a sudden you've got a region or an area or whatever it is that you have there. And I left that organization. I joined SmartForce at the time as a I think the title was Inside Learning Consultant. And inside that organization, you started to see different roles inside the organization. We reported into different people, but it didn't hit for me that there was something other than vertical, where I thought, okay, well, I'm going to be inside, then I'm going to go be a regional whatever, and then I'll be a strategic whatever, and then maybe one day I get to lead a group of people. It was once I started leading sales teams and getting involved in the revenue, more direct revenue aspects. Because I know that like that learning consultant role, I would actually say was a precursor to a customer success type role in today's terms. I didn't realize that, hey, there's actually an opportunity to specialize across functional areas in the business. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go up, but you can start to get a much broader perspective. So I think this is more natural in revenue teams as they create specialization and move people around. Is that fair?
I think on the revenue and the sales side, I think that's a fair statement. But you also have pigeonholed itis. So, your pre-sales, sales, post-sales kind of genre, right? So when you've been tapped into pre-sales, you're a dreamer. You can make magic out of nothing. And then sales has to go and sell that. And post-sales then looks around and says, you did what? Like, are you sure? And so part of it is, yes, you're right. But you do kind of get pigeonholed into the 3-track monster, right, of the sales organization. And you can have TAMs, right, and ETAMs and inside, outside, direct, indirect. I know all the roles.
Sure.
But I think there is an element of being pigeonholed as well. And again, that's not to say that people shouldn't have specializations or specialties. And people can have a great time being in pre-sales or TAM or what have you, right? And great. But again, there's, I think, opportunity to, let's just look at pre-sales and post-sales. Like imagine if a pre-sales individual were to hang out for 6 months in the post-sales land and we're with the consultants, the implementers, the SIs or whatever. Imagine what they'd learn, the networks they build, the fact that pre-sales was whipping up a bunch of ideas that had no chance in hell of being implemented. And then they'd have a bit of a reality check, right, as to what actually post-sales goes through to implement the dream. And I think you'd get empathy, you get respect, you get understanding, you get a whole other set of skills. And they can go back after 6 months maybe and into their pre-sales role with a sort of an epiphany, an aha moment, Mike, of, well, geez, I better not, I can dream, but maybe I should scale back the dreaming and not just have smoked mirrors and, vaporware to sell the customer, in collusion, if you will, with the sales account exec as well, and then run off to the next shiny object while it's post-sales is out there implementing. So that's where my head goes, right? When I start thinking about horizontal ignition, it's also opportunities for empathy. It's to create awareness and vice versa, put consultant into a TAM role or a pre-sales role first 3 months, 6 months, right? Shadow, be part of that team. So again, you understand where they're coming from, sorry. And that's revenue, that's, new labels, right? That's hopes and dreams. And it's, again, another way where you look at it vice versa, like consultants going into pre-sales, they're like, oh, that's why you do what you do. And again, poof, mind's blown. We didn't really get it, right? And again, we're just focusing on, the sales continuum right now, but the same can be said for HR, for marketing, for product, for engineering, wherever, man.
So why do we get caught up in this belief or this bias that, no, you've got to have this certain experience in order to be able to do this thing, or you kind of fit into this specific, you get typecasted into this role. You're either pre-sales or you're post-sales, or you're a marketing person or you're not, or you're a product person or you're not, or you're an engineer or you're not, or you're an operations person. Why do we get trapped in this way of thinking?
2 words, Taylorism and efficiency. Taylorism, of course, is a nod to, 100 years ago with Frederick Taylor, whom invented, quote, the scientific principles of management, end quote, which is effectively for him at Bethlehem Steel back in the early 1900s to use a stopwatch to see how fast people were making widgets in the steel assembly lines. And what it relates to with efficiency is that still to this day, organizations want to become as efficient as possible, not effective. That's a whole other word. They want to be efficient. And so if you're efficient, you have to typecast and pigeonhole because you're thinking about economies of scale, do more with less. How do we hit the numbers quicker, faster, better? And that requires, in essence, by hook or by crook, management and senior executives saying, well, what mechanisms do we need to put in place to achieve all of that I just talked about? And that is kind of Taylorism, which is how do we become more efficient with our people? Well, let's not give them breadth and space. Let's make sure that they're very specialized in their role. And why would we want to help them learn other skills? Why would we do that? Because that's going to make us less efficient. That means we got to train them on something else, or we got to backfill the role that they're just off, left to go learn something else. And so I think that's the problem. Is I'm not against efficiency, Mike, but the problem is that we don't look at it, panoptically, like holistically. And if we were to carve our entire organization's workforce into sort of like, well, let's donate, if you will, let's invest, probably a better word, like 20%, 25% of time to the development of the organization and look at it more holistically than an individual in a role, then what you're doing is you're looking at the bigger picture, longer term. You're not suffering from, and the relationship to Taylorism and efficiency, of course, is short-termism. So you got senior leaders whom, again, by virtue and the nature of their job description, is to make money fast. Again, I'm not naive. It's not about making money or EBITDA or good profitability. But at the same time, there is this, again, I'm awake and untethered from executive roles. So now I have the better ability to sort of yap about these things way more openly than I ever have, because I'm not tethered to an executive role, of course, right? But I've been yapping with this for 10, 15 years. Just now I'm unleashed. Maybe some would say unhinged, Mike. Anyway, back to the point. Hold on, let me make the point. So when we're talking about short-termism, executives, sales, product, engineering, doesn't matter, finance, are shackled by the fact that, particularly publicly traded companies, but even just profit companies, right? They're shackled by the fact they have to demonstrate that they're growing. And that means whether it's revenue, EBITDA, or both, or customer base, customer sat, whatever, you're going to do whatever it takes to be as efficient as possible. Yet when you take off your blinders and you look at the bigger picture, where are we going to be in 3, 5, 7 years? That's when you have to be a good executive and think the longer term and not get sucked into the vortex of short-termism.
As you're talking through this, one of the things that comes to mind is so many organizations talk about creativity, innovation, kind of moving ahead, going and doing what's next. Some of them will think about bringing in new blood into the organization so that they can add this oxygen into the company. And what's coming up for me as you describe this is some of that new blood actually exists inside your company if you give an opportunity for that blood to transfer to another aspect of the business.
One of the best examples I've come across, weirdly, ironically even, is in my own country, Canada, and the federal government of Canada. Now, 5 years ago, I know we're recording this in 2021, so 5 years ago in 2016, a gentleman by the first name of Abe decides that there's too many people kind of unhappy in their roles across 330,000 federal employees, that too many of them are sort of lacking purpose, and too many of them are wanting to quit. 5 years ago, 2016, he starts something called Free Agents. And this Free Agents program, grassroots, one dude just created on his own, has now become an institution in the government for exactly that point, i.e., you put your name in the hat, see if you can be selected as one of like 200 or 300 free agents for the year or for 18 months or 2 years or what have you. But then all the different federal units, right, they decide, oh, you know what? We've got this project and we would love 2, 3, 4 people from other parts of the federal government to work on it in our department, our ministry. And so it's like a job board. It's like, some of the gig economy job boards, if you will, but there's substantive projects of 3, 6, 12 months in length. And they get people from other parts of the federal government through a free agency program where they get to keep their existing role. They go off for these short terms, if you will. They learn, they make new networks. If that unit wants to hire them permanently, it's okay. Everyone's happy with that. And then they would backfill the role permanently where they came from because it's been, replaced temporarily due to the fact that they've created this free agency program. So when I glommed onto this, and I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, if a government, which most of them are known as being monolithic, bureaucratic monsters, can successfully come up with literally a free agency program that is not akin to or not unlike, NBA or Major League Baseball or NHL hockey free agency that happens where people switch teams. Well, why can't other commercial profit-based businesses do this then as a way in which to develop the employee, to create networks, to increase the weak ties across an organization, and to provide, some lateral, horizontal ignition kind of hope and opportunity? If a government, Mike, can do this, anybody can do this. Like, come on.
It's, as you're describing it, another thing that comes to mind is the whole idea of like foreign exchange students. So we've even had inside schools where you have these foreign exchange programs. You send people out, people learn a bit more. Everybody inside each of those families ideally learns something. Then people come back and everything gets better. So it's not like there's not a model, as I speak in double negatives, but it's there's a model that exists out there that allows this.
Absolutely.
This works. Yeah.
I mean, two examples. First of all, my wife, my infinitely better half, is a director of academics at a school here in Canada. And it's a boarding school. It's got like 1,000 kids, right? Okay. It's K to 12.
Yep.
There are 25 Mexicans that show up for their grade 10 year. Okay. And they board at the school, and they're from all parts of Mexico, shoved into, Victoria, Canada, like, heads up, you're going to learn about Canada. In grade 11, another 20 to 25 Germans show up, and they do their grade 11 year here. So similar to your point about exchange, when we as parents are thinking about our kids and we send them off from Mexico and Germany to Victoria, Canada to learn a year away, imagine how better off those individual kids are when they're back in grade 11, grade 12, what have you, right? And the stories they're bringing to their friends, their family, and just the outlook that they're going to have in life changes. It alters forever. So horizontal ignition back into the organization for me is not just job shadowing. It's not just free agency. It's a mindset. Yes, those are tactics, job shadowing, job rotations, free agency program, of course. But you've got other opportunities, right, that the organization needs to think about. So again, 1973, Thomas Granovetter's research paper, The Strength of Weak Ties, is just a brilliant piece of research that anyone who wants to understand the impact that networks can have on your career, on your development, is missing the lunch bucket here. So Granovetter basically says, look, you do have strong ties, like you have, as you go through careers, you're going to have some people who are your besties, your very trusted advisors, your own kind of personal board of governors. Like we all have people we go to. But like you and I would say there's a strength in our weak ties based on our previous careers, the ways in which how we've got to know each other. And here we are yammering away on a podcast about this whole thing. I would say we have a weak tie relationship. Now, if I lived in a foxhole and you lived in a trench for years on end and didn't come out and say, hey, I wonder what Mike's up to. I wonder what Dan's up to. Would we be having this dialogue? No. So my point being long-windedly is that when executives find ways in which to connect people in the organization, not just by saying, hey, Mike, can I introduce you to Sandeep? She's beautiful and what a lovely person. You'll learn a lot from her. Yeah, sure, that's nice, but it's an ethos. I'm talking about a systemic way in which to ignite horizontal connections and skill development, all as part of your culture. That's what I'm getting at.
So let's talk about how we break down some of these biases so that people can go through and say it, so that they don't fall into the trap of thinking, well, I don't see how this is going to apply or how this is going to help out, and kind of cross the aisle, so to speak, engage with others, bring people in. What are some things that either organizations can think about when doing this, or leveraging back your experience as a chief learning officer inside a large organization where you saw multiple groups probably operating in silos in some areas, not thinking that they're working on the same problems as somebody else, or somebody else might have solved that earlier. How can organizations start to think a bit differently about this? Break down silos.
Great question. So let's think about onboarding and induction right away.
Okay. Yep.
Right? Every organization has some sort of onboarding and induction program. I would argue that the predominant portion of them are sort of like a 1 or 2 day PowerPoint by death, welcome to our company extravaganza. There's free donuts, if you're Canadian, of course. And that's what they do. They PowerPoint them to death. Here's legal coming in, doing their 1 hour. Here's finance coming in. Here's the payroll people, right? It is, I guess, the best of the not very good when it comes to what it could be. So what could you do differently? Well, I mean, Michael Watkins wrote a book called The First 90 Days, and it's like one of the best books for induction and onboarding out there, yet no one really uses it per se. Okay, there's a few. There's some smart people out there that are using it, but not really, like not as an organizational ethos. So, for example, Mike, why not create the first 90 days to your organization as an ethos, which would then have examples like, in week 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 12, let's say, you are going to get up out of your foxhole and you're going to go meet someone in a different unit. And here's the 3 ways in which you can go do that. Your boss can help you, HR can help you, you can do it on your own. But as part of like a list, almost like of things you've got to do in your first 90 days, we want you at the end of 90 days to make sure that you have 6 people you've gotten up out of your foxhole and met and had a conversation. Now, the flip side is the organization needs to know that this is happening. So every other employee then says, look, you might get called from some of our new hires. Accept the call. Accept the call. Make a relationship. Because every time we onboard somebody, we at this organization, we want to make sure weak ties are being established. That's just like one little example of ethos, of culture, of systemic change that is kind of a quid pro quo. Like the onboarding people put it in, and the organizational leaders look back and say, okay, team, someone sends you an email and says, I don't know what I'm doing here. Can I meet for 45 minutes? But I was told to do this in onboarding. You say yes, and you start creating karma. So that's just like one little example, right? I got a million of them, but there's one, again, you look at it holistically. What can you do to change the culture? There's a weak tie example.
Let's say I'm an employee inside an organization and I find this interesting. And I'm thinking, wow, you know what? All along I've been thinking about the idea of vertical ignition, and now I see this idea of horizontal ignition. I get to try something different. Where do I start? Like, who do I go and talk to? How does that conversation start? What's the right way to go about doing this if I want to introduce this into an organization?
One of the ways I would do it, depending, again, size of business units and, functions are going to matter, right? So let's not bring in size for a second, but I would probably start in a unit with the tiger team concept. Like lots of organizations have successfully implemented, a tiger team model. Unfortunately, it's usually due to some sort of catastrophe or, panic attack that the company is having that they need to go solve something quickly. So, a competitor just introduced something into the market and all of a sudden this company says, oh my God. So they assemble a tiger team to combat the competitive threat, right? But what if we were more proactive? What if, as opposed to putting tiger teams together, just because you're addressing a panic attack or some sort of competitive threat, what if you're proactive and said, you know what? Our unit is going to have a tiger team mentality, and that we want to put on the table through your ideas, i.e. business units, we're going to tackle 3 out there opportunities this year. And even though we're in functional teams, this must be cross-functional. And so we're going to vote on what these ideas are, and we're going to have 3 different tiger teams. You have a chance to put your name in the hat to see if you want to be part of the tiger team. Now, scope, depth, and breadth is going to dictate whether it's 3 people, 5 people, 8 people, whatever. But guess what? And that might be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 12 weeks. We don't know. But again, the point being is that you are creating kind of the free agency system I'm talking about through a tiger team mentality. And then, almost like trialing it within a unit and then saying, hey, C-suite or hey, CEO or whoever, right? Hey, CHRO, this worked pretty well. So why don't we make this, part and parcel to our culture going forward and have a tiger team or free agency kind of model across the org? I think it's great. I think there's, again, lots of teams organizations that do have tiger team mentality or free agency mentality, but it's always, again, back to the panic attack of, oh my God, what do we do about this? Right. So, even when natural disasters occur, it's amazing when the EMOC or, the various emergency preparedness teams kick into gear. It's like a tiger team of passion because they want to solve the flood or the tornado or the hurricane or the typhoon or the earthquake or whatever. And it's amazing what you can see humanity do during a crisis. So again, flip the psychology around. What if you're proactive about the crisis? The crises are these 1, 2, 3 opportunities a Tiger team can address. It's actually going to help us move the needle forward in ways we hadn't thought of before, and doing those cross-functional team and kind of networks in which to create it. That, to me, makes a hell of a lot of sense when you then start thinking about purpose of self, self-worth, self-actualization, feeling valuable, all the good things that we want to build into people's DNA to stick around in the organization that pays them, which then brings back to the whole conversation about attrition and retention and attraction, right? So if I'm an employee that sees Tiger Team's free agency models, horizontal ignition bits, and you're like, well, company Y over there that sort of wants me and is trying to poach me doesn't offer this. I like this idea here. I like what we got going. Like, I feel good. I feel wanted. I feel valuable. I feel I can get up and move around this organization and try different things. That's a mindset. And then you start addressing then, the fiduciary point of the organization, which is we're here to be efficient and effective. So if we're keeping people and not having to rehire all the time, AKA think about the insidiously named Great Resignation, think of what we can do. We can prevent that. We can actually inculcate a culture of innovation just by doing some of these things in our own house. Sign me up, Mike. Sign me up.
I've got to ask, why do you say insidious name Great Resignation? What is it that you don't like about how that's been categorized?
Everything. Kudos to the associate prof at Texas University, wherever he's from, for this aha moment. Are you kidding me, Mike? This has been building for years. The Great Resignation is simply an outcome of the employees' great awakening. Like, through the pandemic, which in most parts of the world is still going on, incidentally, but nonetheless, you got people who have been intubated into their own cocoon of thinking, what the hell am I doing in my life, my work life, my everything life? And when we call out the Great Resignation, we're just basically saying employees have gotten to the point through this cocooning and intubation and, self-analysis as to what really matters. But it's been brewing since Milton Friedman in 1970 said that the only reason the business exists is for profit. And everyone got fixated on profit, not the health and the outcome of the culture of the organization, and serve the customer. So it's been 50 years in the making. And now we're waking up to the Great Resignation. No, it's a catalyst. The pandemic's been a catalyst to this kind of newfound outcome. So it's really a great awakening. It's the great aha moment. And again, if leaders and senior leaders aren't thinking about the ways in which to create that right culture, free agency aside, great, horizontal ignition aside, you're going to see a lot more people waking up and saying, I do want to work at that company over there because they get it. And so if you look at the JOLTS data, the BLS data in the US, right? In August, it was high. In September, it was higher, i.e. the quit rates. And it's not just essential workers in McDonald's and Burger Kings and healthcare. Yes, it's high, but now we're seeing the white collar knowledge worker, middle management people, like double and triple the people like leaving. Why, Mike? And where are they going? Well, the why we know, and the where are they going are the companies that are actually doing what we're talking about today.
Yeah, I think if you're a leader inside your business and you really struggle with answering this question, how would my people answer the question around impact that I have on the business, impact that I have on my customers, impact in the work that I'm doing? If you struggle with understanding that from the perspective of your members of your team, that empathy piece, you've got a lot of risk. Like, you've got to start figuring this stuff out here pretty quick, because if you don't, somebody else is going to figure it out for you, or people are going to figure out a way and your problem's going to become much, much bigger. People look at this and they say, you know what? I spend a lot of time at work. I spend a lot of energy at work. I spend a lot of my mind share at work. I want to make an impact. And there's an opportunity to make an impact in so many different ways, shapes, or forms, given remote first. I'm fortunate enough. I started working at home in 2003. So I've been doing the whole remote work thing for a while. it's funny to see the awakening that's happening out there where people are like, wow, you could actually get a lot of things that work. And oh, by the way, I don't have to spend 45 minutes to an hour to 2 hours to even 15 minutes getting from my house to someplace else. There's a better way to do it. And this is, I think, the thing that compelled me to reach out to Dan when I saw the article was this whole idea of shifting the way of thinking that people can have inside an organization when creating opportunity. And it's not just about that upward mobility, climbing the ladder. Sometimes it's taking a bridge and going from one side to another.
I love how you use the word bridge there, because if people know their Latin, which no one does anymore. So
I certainly don't.
Or pig Latin for that matter, but let's stick with Latin. My last name is broken down into 2 Latin words. Ponti is bridge, and fract obviously is to break, fracture. And so I've often been saying that I'm actually living a life to be the antithesis of my last name. I'm trying to build bridges through my commentary, my writing, my speaking, my consulting. And I loved how you use the word bridge, because I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. We need to build new bridges in the organization from management to employee, from team member to team member, from team member out to customer, from customer back to it's all about bridges. And I think the concrete's rather shoddy right now, Mike. I really do.
And people are realizing, you know what, there's other places to get the concrete, and there's other places that might have a better foundation. And you know what, they may be starting new. They may not have the same technical debt that a lot of the other organizations have. And so there's this flexibility that's coming out. And one of the questions I've got, when you, as a senior leader inside a large organization, looking across these silos that exist or these individual business units that exist, how often would you run across a situation where people were talking about the same problem, but they were just using different words and thought they were operating in a completely different environment as a result of the language challenge inside the business?
Well, first of all, a lot. But second of all, it's okay. Do not have a singular culture. Mm-hmm. Organizations are made up of a culture of cultures. And yes, there is the hope and the wish and the want for a systemic culture of language and behavior that everyone subscribes to. And it's not just the 4 values that are written on the wall and the purpose statement, although it's important, right? There's a hope that everyone does understand the higher ground that we all aspire to be interacting with. But there's a different culture in sales to finance to HR to engineering, R&D. Let's not kid ourselves. And that's okay. That is totally okay. At the same time, what we need to do, back to the metaphor of the bridges, right, is to build those bridges in between the units so that we do know and respect and empathize and can be compassionate with how their role is or functions, and why sales can't take meetings the last week of a quarter. Like when HR doesn't understand that and aren't able to empathize with why sales can't take a meeting the last week of every quarter, it's because they don't understand that they're driven, A, by something different, and B, that there's a different culture in sales the last week of a quarter.
So what I loved was it usually happened around September time period because October was open enrollment in a lot of organizations. So you'd have this open enrollment related to benefits that would happen right at the 1st of October. And there'd be this push toward the end of September to get everything put together. And what we forget is, end of September, depending on what your fiscal year is, could be the end of Q3, which is really a really important quarter inside the business. So why can't I get people to respond? Well, it's not because they're not interested in what's happening inside the business. They're actually operating in the business. And is there a way for us to shift or rethink the way that we structure some of the timelines here? So yeah.
So let's go back. Let's go back to horizontal ignition. So imagine if HR was shadowing sales for a bit, or was able to be a spy in the camp, I call it sometimes, right? Then they could bring back some of that intel into HR. Say, okay, you know what, guys, I just found out that actually they don't answer emails unless it has the name customer in the subject line for that final week. So maybe we should hold off on the benefits program to maybe mid-October. What do you think, everyone? How about that? That's both empathy and showing that ignition point, right, of understanding. And that it's not, again, that the culture of HR is wrong because sales arguably needs to understand, in this example, right, needs to understand HR as well. Like,
Sure.
why are they pressured for benefits? Who cares? Well, there's a timeline of things that have to happen, right? And
Right.
I know because of the signups and insurance companies needing their money, blah, blah, blah. Like, we get it.
Yep.
So there's double or equal or reciprocal is the word, empathy that's going to be required. But it all comes back to culture and civility. So if the culture is one of silos and not sharing, and as I've said in one of the books, we must dare to share if we want to be a culture of engaged employees, then if you're just going to stick in your fiefdoms, your silos, your stovepipes, and not come up again, literally out of that foxhole and say, well, what's it like over there? How can I help? Then you do have, to your earlier question, like you asked 5 minutes ago, you do have vernacular differences, and that's because of the silo. So if you don't get out of your sales silo and look around and don't have opportunity, right, then you're never going to really understand why engineering acts the way that they do, or the product team. And they do things differently there as well, right? So again, it goes back to, we must subscribe to kind of a general vernacular culture behavior, but it's going to be different. And we have to respect the differences, but then be proactive in knowing that my style might have to change. My request might have to change if I want to be successful in my own role, because I have to think about others. That's what it comes down to.
Dan, you never disappoint. This has been an awesome conversation. One of the themes that we're focused on, the theme that we're focused on this month, and the month that this goes live in January, but we're recording actually in November. But the theme that we'll be focused on in January is around accountability. So if I say something like personal accountability in the context of our broader conversation, what comes to mind for you?
So it's interesting, the word accountability, first of all, right? I guess I'm a hack etymologist, right? I kind of think about words and like, how do they originate? How do they form? What's the point, right? You know, let's like Pontefract, right? Broken bridge. What the hell is that, right? Trying to be the antithesis of my last name. Accountability. What in part it says to me is that we need to account for our ability.
Okay.
And so the word ability is literally in accountability. And ability is behavior to be actioned. So we must have an account of our own ability, which demonstrates our character. It demonstrates our agency. It demonstrates how we want to be known when we leave a room. So accountability for me is first and foremost the fact that you have a responsibility for your ability to take action. No one else does. Like it's up to you. So when you hear the word personal accountability, it's actually redundant. It's accountability. You don't need the personal part. Yep. Because it's up to you. So you have an accountability to be trustworthy, to be proactive, to be responsive, to be non-judgmental, to be inclusive, to tackle issues that are part of our environment, social inequities. Like that's accountability for you in your humanity. So what's your ability? Now, we are at different grades. So I suck at many things that I'm still working on. And it's my own accountability to build up the abilities there that I'm bad at or negligent at or working on, and not to fake my way through it, to be open enough to say, I'm scared of heights, still working on that. I am not handy, still trying to figure out how to use a level, right? Like to even, hang photos. Like Denise is great. I'm awful at it, but I'm working on it after 50 years. I put an electrical socket in. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I wanted to learn because I don't feel like I'm handy. So I had accountability to sort of show Denise I knew how to put in electrical sockets so that we could hang this kind of water fountain thing and it looked pretty cool. So again, I taught myself and I took an account of my ability I was negligent in, learned something and was very proud. And now I'm accountable to myself, if you will, about knowing how to put in an electrical socket. So that's what it means to me. This notion of taking account of your abilities, looking at what you're good at, sharing that goodness and being like very able, I hope, to be giving of the talents that you do have that are your abilities that are in the, net positive realm, and give it away, share it. Like I'm a pretty good writer. I'm a pretty good speaker, pretty good consultant. I don't need to make gobs of money, but I love working with organizations that hire me, and I'm happy to give away books and reduce talks in fees because it's like, oh, you're pretty cool. Like, let's work together. So I think we all have that ability to account for what we're good at, what we're not, in summary, to make amends when we're good at things and to help people with that, and then to make amends with where we have deficiencies and to continue to work on them. How's that for an answer?
A great answer. And I really like the highlight, the thing that you highlighted there, which is this kind of awareness of what you're not good at and being honest about it, not faking it to create this perception, which ultimately can let people down. And the thing I would add to it is I hope that people feel comfortable on those things that they're not good at. Like for me, Jen does not want me doing anything related to electrical around the house. This is something we outsource. I am fine to admit that it'd be great if Andrew had a real dad who knew how to do this stuff around the house, but he does not. I've got another set of skills that are pretty good at. There's things that could go horribly wrong. So in the spirit of horribly wrong, be okay outsourcing those things. Still try if you're interested, but be accountable to yourself around those abilities. That's an awesome perspective.
Well, and if we just extend it just a bit further, think about leaders and leaders who come into work virtually or face-to-face, and they mistakenly show up with the aura of being the Teflon leader. Like nothing sticks to me because I'm good at everything. Like bug off, basically. Of course I'm awesome at this, And then the whole, fake it till you make it kind of mantra is just ridiculous. That's not leadership. Leadership is being authentic with, again, what your inabilities are, working on them, but also asking for help and being open about what you're not so good at. Because, the whole there's no I in team mantra, sure. But I kind of more believe in the team of rivals idea and not rivals being competitors, rivals of talent. So I don't want to create rivals on the team, but I know that there's rivalry, if you will, on what our competence levels are, or abilities level are. So I have an accountability as a leader to then investigate on the team who has what, who knows what skills are missing in myself, but also how do I create and complement a team of rivals, if you will, rival skills, and call upon those when needed to help me as the leader and or the team function and deliver on the goals and objectives set. That's leadership 101 stuff, but it gets lost a lot, Mike.
Dan, this conversation has been awesome. I will include a link, or we'll include a link in the show notes. Jen actually will include a link in the show notes to the Horizontal Ignition article in Forbes. Where can people go to follow you, learn more about what you're working on? And we'll include links to your four books as well. But where would you like to send people to find out more about what you're working on and engage with you directly if they feel compelled?
So kind of you. I have a tough last name to spell, but it's danpontefract.com. Or the last book was called Lead Care Win. Leadcarewin.com is probably easiest. Love the LinkedIn community most, probably out of all the social channels, but engage on Insta and Twitter. Facebook is scaring me, so not so much Facebook, even though I know Insta is owned by them, or Meta, as I should say. And starting next year, funny enough, Mike, I am going to do a TikTok channel for Gen Z. So 50-year-old Dan is going to speak to the 12 to 24-year-olds and just create a TikTok channel to help them see, as almost like a translator, a code breaker of what you're getting into, and some advice from the old guy.
I made the comment a while back about maybe I should start recording TikTok videos, and my kids just shook their heads and laughed at me. Like it wasn't even, wow. Well, and I
have not told my 3 teenagers that. So let's mum's the word on that one.
Yeah. Nobody share any of this with Dan's kids. If you know of somebody who would find this conversation valuable, and I'm sure you do, please share it via LinkedIn or Twitter. Let Dan and I know via LinkedIn or Twitter. Sales is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about yours?